The first thing I noticed was that the sound stopped the moment I woke up. Not faded. Not moved away. Stopped like it knew I was listening. I could feel my pulse in my ears, each beat louder than the last, drowning out everything except that one question spiraling in my mind. How long had it been there? I wanted to check the time, but even the small movement of reaching for my phone felt dangerous. I didn't know why. I just knew that if I moved, the fragile balance of the moment would break. Another sound followed, closer this time. Not footsteps exactly, more like the careful shift of weight. A pause. Then another shift. Whoever was out there wasn't wandering. They weren't lost. They were listening too. That was when the fear changed. Up until that moment I was still trying to explain things. Pipes. Wind. My own imagination. But fear like this doesn't come from logic. It comes from instinct, the ancient part of your brain that recognizes danger before your thoughts can catch up. My skin prickled. My stomach tightened. Every survival alarm in my body was screaming the same message. This is real. I tried to tell myself I was safe. I was indoors. The doors were locked. I checked them before going to bed. I always did. I was careful like that. But then I remembered something that made my chest tighten even more. I didn't remember locking the back door. The sound came again, unmistakable now. A slow movement. A pause. Almost like someone testing how much noise they could make without waking me fully. That's when I realized something far worse than the fear itself. Whatever was in my house believed I was still asleep, and it was moving accordingly. My mouth went dry. I could feel my hands shaking, even though I hadn't moved an inch. I wanted to scream, but fear locked my throat shut. I wanted to run, but I didn't know where it was. Running blindly felt like a death sentence. So I did the only thing I could think of. I listened. Seconds stretched into something unbearable. My mind raced through every horrible possibility, each one worse than the last. Person. Multiple people. Something else entirely. Then breathing. Not mine. It was slow. Controlled. Close enough that I could hear the faint hitch at the end of each inhale. I squeezed my eyes shut, my heart hammering so violently I was sure it could hear it. I knew with a certainty that still makes my stomach drop, that if I opened my eyes, I would see something standing there, watching. And in that moment, before anything else happened, one terrifying thought burned into my mind. People think the worst part of horror stories is what happens next. They're wrong. The worst part is realizing something has already gone wrong. And you're the last one to understand it. Before that night, my life was painfully ordinary. And honestly, that's what made it feel so safe. My name's Ryan. I'm 29, work a standard 9-to-5 job, and live alone in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside a mid-sized American city. The kind of place where houses all look a little too similar. Lawns are trimmed every Saturday morning, and nothing ever seems to happen worth talking about. It wasn't exciting, but it was predictable, and predictability was comforting. That night was a Wednesday, just another workday that blended into the rest. I'd gotten home around 6:30 p.m., tossed my keys into the bowl by the door, and kicked off my shoes without even thinking. Dinner was leftovers, cold pizza and a soda, eaten while scrolling through my phone on the couch. I remember feeling tired in a normal way, the kind that comes from routine, not stress. The house felt familiar. Comfortable. Quiet. I'd lived there for almost 3 years and never once felt uneasy. No strange neighbors. No weird noises. No history that would make someone think twice about living there. It was just a simple single-story home with a small backyard and a fence separating me from the woods behind the neighborhood. I actually liked that part. The trees made the place feel private. By 9 p.m. I was doing what I always did. Dishes in the sink, TV on low in the background, lights dimmed. I checked my emails, answered a few texts, and set my alarm for the morning. Everything about the night felt normal, boring even. That's important to understand. Nothing felt off. Around 10:30, I did my usual routine. I locked the front door, checked the windows, and turned off the lights room by room. I didn't rush. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't looking over my shoulder. I remember standing in the hallway for a second, listening to the house settle, the quiet creaks of wood cooling, the faint hum of the refrigerator. Those sounds had always been there. They were part of the house's rhythm. I brushed my teeth, washed my face, and climbed into bed by 11. The sheets were cool. The room smelled faintly like laundry detergent. Outside, the neighborhood was silent. No traffic. No voices. Just the distant sound of wind brushing against trees. I lay there scrolling on my phone for a few minutes, not really thinking about anything important. Just random videos, pointless headlines, distractions to wind down the day. My mood was calm, relaxed, safe. Eventually, I set my phone on the nightstand and turned onto my side. The last thing I remember thinking before falling asleep was how quiet everything was, and how nice it felt. No stress, no fear, no sense that anything was wrong. That house had never given me a reason to feel uneasy. It had never made a strange sound I couldn't explain. It had never felt watched or unfamiliar. It was just home. That's why what happened later didn't make sense. Because nothing in my life, nothing in that house, in that neighborhood, or in my routine, had prepared me for the idea that something could go wrong without warning. If you'd asked me earlier that evening if I felt safe, I wouldn't have hesitated. I would have said yes. And I would have meant it. I don't know exactly what pulled me out of sleep. It wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't a loud bang. It was something subtler than that, like my body sensed a change before my mind did. My eyes opened slowly, unfocused, staring into the darkness of my bedroom. The house was quiet. Too quiet. First, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe I just shifted in my sleep. Maybe my brain misfired the way it sometimes does at night. I lay there for a few seconds listening, waiting for the familiar sounds to return. The hum of the fridge, the faint tick of the hallway clock. They didn't. Instead, I noticed something else. The air felt different. Not cold. Not hot. Just still. Heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I swallowed and shifted slightly under the covers. The mattress creaked softly beneath me, louder than it should have been in the silence. That's when I heard it. A sound from somewhere deeper in the house. Soft. Rhythmic. Almost like movement. I held my breath and listened harder. It wasn't footsteps, not exactly. More like a faint dragging noise, barely audible, followed by a pause. Then another. Slow. Careful. My heart rate picked up, but I stayed calm. Houses make noise, I told myself. Pipes. Wood. Temperature changes. I'd lived here long enough to know that. Except this sound wasn't familiar. It didn't follow any pattern I recognized. I glanced at the digital clock on my nightstand. 2:14 a.m. The blue numbers glowed softly, the only light in the room. I stared at them longer than necessary, grounding myself in something normal. Then the sound stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself to relax. My eyes drifted toward the bedroom door. It was open just the way I always left it. The hallway beyond was pitch black. I don't know why, but a strange thought crossed my mind. I don't remember the hallway being that dark. It didn't make sense. There was a small nightlight near the bathroom that always cast a faint glow. It wasn't bright, but it was enough to outline the walls. Now nothing. I sat up slightly, propping myself on my elbows. As I did, I became aware of another change, one I couldn't explain at all. The house smelled different. Not bad. Not good. Just unfamiliar. Like damp air mixed with something metallic. It was faint, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. I listened again. From somewhere near the living room came a soft creak. Then another. Slow. Intentional. The sound wasn't loud enough to scream danger, but it was wrong in a way that made my skin prickle. I felt a mild unease settle in my chest. Not panic, not fear, just a growing awareness that something was off. I told myself someone might be outside. A neighbor. A stray animal near the fence. Anything but what my instincts were whispering. Still, I didn't move. I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to scare myself over nothing. That's when the feeling started. The unmistakable sensation of being watched. It wasn't visual. I didn't see anything. But the air felt focused. Like attention had settled somewhere in the house and stayed there. I shifted again, pulling the blanket tighter around me, suddenly aware of how exposed I felt lying there. Another sound echoed through the hallway. A soft tap. Then silence. I stared at the doorway, my eyes straining to adjust, half expecting to see movement. There was none. Just darkness. Thick and unmoving. My heartbeat was louder now. I could feel it in my ears. Still, nothing had actually happened. No footsteps. No voices. No clear threat. Just small sounds. Small changes. A creeping sense that the normal rules of the house had shifted when I wasn't looking. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself to lie back down. But as I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. The hallway light switch, one I never turned off, was down. And I was absolutely sure it hadn't been that way when I went to sleep. That's when I knew this wasn't just my imagination anymore. Something in the house had changed. And whatever it wasn't making itself obvious. The moment I swung my legs off the bed, the house reacted. That's the only way I can describe it. The air thickened instantly, pressing down on my chest like I'd stepped into deep water. Every sound, my breathing, the soft rustle of fabric, the faint creak of the floor, felt amplified and wrong, as if the house itself was listening. I stood there for a second, frozen, my bare feet against the cold wood floor. Something in my gut screamed that standing up had been a mistake. Then I heard it again. This time there was no mistaking it. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Coming from the hallway. They weren't rushing. They weren't hiding. Whoever or whatever was out there moved with confidence, like it knew exactly where I was. My mouth went dry. Hello. I called out before I could stop myself. The word came out thin and weak, swallowed by the darkness beyond my doorway. The footsteps stopped immediately. That silence was worse than the sound. I strained to hear anything, breathing, shifting, something, but the hallway stayed unnaturally still. The pressure in the air grew heavier, making it harder to breathe. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone, the screen lighting up my room in a pale glow. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the hallway, just beyond where the light should have been, something stood where the darkness was thickest. At first my brain refused to process it. It didn't look solid, not fully. More like a shape cut out of the dark itself. Taller than any person should be, its outline wrong in subtle ways, bending where it shouldn't bend. It didn't move. Didn't need to. I felt it watching me. The temperature dropped so suddenly my breath fogged in front of my face. Goosebumps erupted along my arms as a deep primal fear slammed into me all at once. This wasn't a trick of light. This wasn't my imagination. Something was inside my house. The shape shifted slightly, and the hallway floor let out a low, aching creak beneath it, as if the weight of whatever stood there was more than the house was meant to carry. That's when I saw its face. Or what passed for one. There were no clear features. No eyes I could describe. Just a darker void where a face should have been. Slowly leaning forward, as if trying to understand me. Studying me. The air vibrated. Not with sound but with presence. My phone slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a sharp crack. The noise broke whatever spell had frozen me in place. The thing reacted instantly. It took one step forward. The lights in my bedroom flickered violently, the bulbs buzzing like they were about to burst. The pressure in my chest spiked, and panic finally took control. This wasn't someone breaking in. This wasn't a person at all. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the bed, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might tear free from my ribs. The thing moved again, faster this time, its form stretching unnaturally as it crossed more distance than it should have in a single step. The hallway seemed to shrink around it. The walls groaned. The air smelled sharp and metallic now, burning the back of my throat. I could hear a low sound vibrating from its direction. Not quite a growl, not quite a breath, but something deep and wrong, like the house itself was warning me. Run. The word hit my mind with absolute clarity. I grabbed the bedroom door and tried to slam it shut. It stopped. Something on the other side pressed against the wood. The door bowed inward slightly, the hinges whining in protest. I screamed and threw my weight against it, adrenaline surging through me as I shoved with everything I had. The pressure on the door didn't feel like hands. Felt like force. Like gravity leaning the wrong way. That's when it finally made a sound. A low broken whisper seeped through the crack near the frame. So close it felt like it was right beside my ear. Said my name. Not loudly. Not angrily. Like it had always known it. Terror crashed through me, cold and absolute. This wasn't just something passing through. It wasn't lost. It wasn't confused. It knew where I was. And now it knew I was afraid. The situation had shifted. This wasn't unease anymore. This was survival. The door gave. Not all at once, just enough. The wood cracked with a sharp, splintering snap, and whatever was on the other side forced a gap wide enough for darkness to pour through like smoke. The pressure slammed into my chest, knocking the air from my lungs. I didn't think. I ran. I spun away from the door and sprinted across the bedroom, my bare feet slamming against the floor as the lights burst behind me with a loud pop. Glass shattered. The room plunged into darkness. Behind me, the door exploded inward. I heard it rush in, not footsteps, not exactly, but a rapid scraping movement, like something dragging itself impossibly fast across the floor. The sound was wrong, uneven, and closing the distance far too quickly. Adrenaline ripped through my body. I hit the hallway at full speed, nearly slipping on the rug as I turned the corner. The house felt warped now, longer, tighter, like the walls had shifted just to slow me down. The air burned my lungs with every breath. I could feel it behind me, not touching me, but close enough that the hairs on my neck stood straight up, close enough that the temperature dropped with every step it took. I reached the stairs and took them two at a time, my hand barely catching the railing as I half fell, half ran downward. Something slammed into the wall above me hard enough to shake the entire staircase. The house screamed. Wood cracked. Picture frames crashed to the floor. The thing came down after me, not walking, not running, sliding down the wall beside the stairs, its shadow stretching unnaturally long. I missed the last step and hit the floor hard, pain shooting up my leg. I screamed and rolled just as something struck where my head had been, splintering the floorboards like brittle bone. Too close. Way too close. I scrambled to my feet and bolted for the front door. My vision tunneled, heart pounding so violently I could hear nothing else. I fumbled with the lock, hands slick with sweat. It was right there now. I could feel it looming behind me, heavy, suffocating, its presence crushing down like a physical weight. A sound escaped it then, low and wet, like a breath forced through something that shouldn't breathe. My fingers slipped. The sound grew louder. I finally got the lock open and yanked the door. It wouldn't budge. Something held it shut from the other side. Panic detonated in my chest. I turned just as the darkness lunged. I ducked on pure instinct, feeling something graze the air above my head. The force knocked me sideways into the wall, stars bursting across my vision. The thing slammed into the door instead, hard enough that the entire frame shook. The grip on the door vanished. I didn't wait. I threw it open and ran into the night. Cold air hit me like a slap, stealing my breath as I stumbled down the porch steps and into the yard. Gravel tore into my feet, but I didn't slow down. I couldn't. Behind me, the front door didn't open. It burst. The porch light flickered wildly, casting strobing shadows as the thing spilled out of the house, its shape stretching and collapsing like it couldn't decide what form to take. I ran for the tree line, lungs screaming, legs burning, every nerve firing at once. Branches whipped my face as I crashed into the woods, barely seeing where I was going. Something slammed into a tree behind me. Another close call. I vaulted over a fallen log and dove into a shallow ditch, mud and dead leaves coating my clothes as I pressed myself flat. I clamped a hand over my mouth, forcing myself not to breathe too loudly. Footsteps, no movement, rushed past. Too fast. It overshot me. For a second there was silence. Then the sound stopped. Right behind me. I felt it lean close. The air grew ice cold. A slow, deliberate inhale brushed the back of my neck. I didn't wait to see if it found me. I exploded out of the ditch and ran harder than I ever had in my life, crashing through the woods until lights finally appeared ahead. Distant, human, safe. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because whatever was chasing me, it let me go. And that terrified me more than if it hadn't. I finally made it to the streetlights at the edge of town, gasping, shaking, and soaked from the snow and mud. Every step felt surreal, like I was moving through someone else's nightmare rather than my own life. My neighbors' houses were warm and bright, their windows spilling yellow light onto the sidewalk, but I didn't stop. I didn't knock on a single door. I didn't want anyone to see me like this, disheveled, terrified, and coated in the chaos of what I had just escaped. When I reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands trembling so violently that it took 3 tries to slide the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a comforting sound that reminded me I still had control somewhere in this world. I drove aimlessly at first, too numb to care about directions, my eyes constantly scanning the shadows at the edges of the road. Every rustle of leaves or flicker of movement in the headlights made my heart slam against my ribs. I thought I had left it behind. I tried to rationalize what happened, convincing myself that maybe I had imagined part of it. Fear has a way of twisting the mind. Shadows seem longer, sounds echo louder, and ordinary things become sinister. But deep down I knew I hadn't imagined it. That presence, that thing had been too real, too tangible. The way it moved, the sounds it made, the pressure in the air when it approached, there was no misinterpretation there. Eventually, I found a familiar motel just a few miles from town. I parked, locked the doors, and collapsed against the seat, shivering from both the cold and the adrenaline still thrumming through me. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? Something with inverted limbs chased me through the woods in my house? Even now it sounded insane, and I wasn't ready to be labeled crazy. Inside the motel room, I tried to calm myself. Hot coffee, blankets, and the television humming softly in the background. It all helped, if only slightly. I forced myself to think rationally. My house was empty. No sign of damage beyond the chaos I'd left behind. No broken locks, no gouges in the wood. Nothing that would indicate anyone or thing had been there. It was as if the place had returned to its normal state, waiting for me to doubt everything I had experienced. But I couldn't doubt the feeling that followed me, like a shadow stitched to my spine. Even in this safe room I could feel its gaze, heavy and intent, lingering just outside. Every sound, the muffled footsteps in the hall, the distant hum of a passing car, set my nerves on edge. The wind rattling the windowpane sounded like fingers tapping against glass, just as it had back home. My body tightened with the same fear I had felt in the barn, and for a moment I was back there running, slipping, trying to survive. I checked my phone for messages, for calls, for anything. Empty. And yet, when I glanced out the window, a shadow flickered near the tree line behind the motel parking lot. I froze, heart hammering. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Too dark, too still to be a person, too deliberate to be a trick of the light. I told myself it was nothing, that it couldn't have followed me, that I was imagining things. And yet the unease persisted. There was one last detail that made my stomach drop. My car door, which I had locked and double-checked, was slightly ajar. Not enough for someone to climb in perhaps, but enough to make me question everything. I don't know what followed me that night. I don't know if it's still out there. But every creak of a floorboard, every rustle of trees, every shadow in the corner of my eye reminds me that I am never truly alone. And I'm not sure I'll ever be safe again. Because when I look outside now, I feel it, watching, waiting, and I know it hasn't forgotten.